Our first presentation, Lost Civilizations, certainly revealed the future. Many people tonight, I'm going to try coming down here for a bit and we'll see how we go, craning our neck around. Many people are concerned today about what's taking place on many fronts in the world. Of course, the Ukraine crisis is certainly big on the agenda. Then there's the tensions between the United States and China, especially in the South Seas area, of course. COVID-19 still has medical scientists somewhat concerned. Think of the rising crime rates in our own country tonight. This has many people worried. What's the next generation and the next going to be like? Because we seem to be getting worse as the time goes on. Many scientists today about climate change and global warming and all of that sort of thing. And then we have ticking away in the background a very fragile global economy. Many economists believe we are living in an economic house of cards. It's not if it's going to crash, but when is the issue. So all these things are causing many people to have uncertainty and to ask this question: what does the future hold? Where are we actually heading in our world? You know, it's not just today. The ancients asked that question. I take people here to a place called Delphi in Greece, because this is the place of the famous oracle of Delphi. The oracles were predictions made by women who were priestesses in this temple of Apollo. They sat on a tripod, a chair, over a crack in the ground where there was fumes coming up, and this probably caused them to hallucinate, but they were said to make predictions. And many famous people came here to Delphi to consult these oracles. We have, for example, Alexander the Great consulted the oracle of Delphi, as did Nero, that infamous emperor of Rome. Many other people as well, wanting to know, where are we heading in their time? This has been a question for many minds for many years. You go home tonight and type in predictions. Well, you won't need to, because I did it last night just to check out where we're up to. 2.16 billion hits. Some people want to know the future. That's about a third, not quite, of the population of the world. So you can see this is not a minor issue in our world. People are wanting to know for various reasons, what does the future hold? You check out or think back about the amount of space given to the glossy tabloid magazines and newspapers for the horoscope, the astrology charts. These have increased over the years. Even you go down to one of the flea markets here, you'll find someone at their table reading palms and so on. These sort of things are increasing today because, of course, of the desire on the part of people to want to know the future. I was fascinated the last couple of weeks, you know, when you've got one of these iPhones, these smartphones, all sorts of ads pop up. And one that keeps popping up on my phone is people are consulting the psychics. It's very interesting. Not sure why they sent it to me. Maybe they heard about my programs, or maybe they saw me typing in predictions or something. You know how it goes today. They can find out what you're interested in, can't they? Then think about it's not just our country. I was here in Benares. This is Benares in India. This is the most sacred place for the Hindus in India. This is where they come to take a sacred bath here in the Ganges River, and even to drink some of this stuff, or wash their mouth out. I mean, I've seen dead bodies and, you know, cows floating to the surface. They tie them to a rock, but of course the string breaks. So I'm not sure how much COVID they're going to get out of that water and a whole bunch of other things. But anyway, this is a very sacred place. But I noticed right here in Benares, here they were, someone had set up their astrology shop, because people want to know what the future is everywhere, it seems, in our world today. What about the year 2012? Remember the Mayan calendar? Remember that? There were lots of predictions being made about the future. Many said the world is going to end. What actually happened? Well, nothing happened. Now, please don't get me wrong. I'm not knocking the people who are making predictions. What my point is, for a few moments, is it's not easy to predict the future. It's a hard game. There were a lot of people making predictions. What about the year 2000? You remember that, when we went from 1999 to 2000? There was some bug that was going to hit everything. What was it? Y2K, right? You've got good memories. Some of us weren't even born back in 2000, were we? The bug that was going to wreck the lights were going to go out, the water was going to go off because anything connected with computers was going to be affected. But what happened? Well, nothing happened. But a lot of people were making predictions. So the point is, it's not easy to get into the prediction game, is it? How about this Times magazine? They did a survey on the predictions that were made, and they discovered in their survey that only 6 out of 250 predictions came out. That's 3%. You could guess at it and do just as good. Again, I'm not knocking the psychics, I'm just making the point. This is a tough game. And then, of course, they discovered that the average leading psychic's batting average is only 16%. So for every 100 predictions that are made, if you check up, the leading ones only get 16 out of 100. Now that's okay if you've got the right side of the 16, but what if you made a decision out of the 84? That's a problem. So it's not an easy game to be in. Which brings us to this question: can we actually know the future, or is it just wishful thinking on our part that we wish we could know the future? That's a very important question. Let me just share with you, if you want to go to a source that says, I can tell the future, you better make sure they got these 2 things, or you could be in trouble. Number 1, you would want them to have historical accuracy, meaning if they can't even get the past events right that they may talk about with you, or the present events, how can you trust them on something about the future? That, if you can't even get that stuff right. So that would be important. But the second one would be more important, and that is you would want them to have a good batting average, right? Preferably 100%. A proven track record of dependable predictions. For example, just quickly, say I said to you tonight, listen, I can tell the future about what's going to happen on the stock markets. And I say to you, listen, tomorrow morning, Qantas shares are going to hit an all-time low, 1 cent apiece. But on Wednesday morning, they'll hit $100 each. But Friday morning, they're going to go back to 1 cent. Now, I suggest to you people, here's my advice as someone on the stock market, I suggest you borrow as much money as you can by tomorrow morning and you buy as many of those Qantas shares as you can at 1 cent, but you make sure you sell them off on Wednesday morning because they're going to go down by Friday. Now, are you going to go home tonight and go and get some money out and buy those Qantas? I hope not. I hope what you would do, however, is you would Google Webster predictions on the stock market. Now, if you saw that I had a pretty good batting average on the stock, you'd probably start to think about borrowing some money, right? Well, you ought to. But that's what we're talking about. Does the source that you're looking at, does it have a good batting average? You need to check that out. So, yes. Is there such a source? Well, there absolutely is. And I'm going to be sharing with you that tonight so that we can see that clearly. The evidence that I'm going to give is from archaeology and ancient history, university history, because it's been my privilege to be able to work in both of those areas. So archaeology basically is digging up the past. When you dig down, you are digging down in time, basically. For example, you'll see it in one of the presentations tonight. If you walk on the streets of Jerusalem today, that's not the time when the Romans were there in Jerusalem. That's 6 metres down, because that's how much that mountain, the place that Jerusalem's on, has grown in 2,000 years, about 6 or 7 metres. Because cities grew. How did they grow? Because if there was an earthquake, they wouldn't bring in the bulldozer for obvious reasons back in the past. They would just bring in fill and dirt and use existing structures and build on top. And, a war happened, buildings fell down, bring in more dirt, use existing structures as foundations and build on top. So the thing grows. The city of Megiddo, from which you probably heard the word Armageddon, Megiddo in Israel, has 31 civilization levels through time. So you can see when you dig down, you're digging up time, if we could put it that way. All right, so let's begin by looking at the 3 most significant discoveries in archaeology. Now, not the most famous, that would be probably Tutankhamun's treasures, all his gold that they found back in 1922, but the most significant and important to us are these. The first one is Egypt. We go to the magnificent land of the Nile, and this was made by the workmen of Napoleon Bonaparte, because he came to Egypt and in 1798, but in 1799 they discovered the famous Rosetta Stone. This was down in the delta area of the Nile, up in the delta area. Now you can see it's in 3 sections. The top section up the top here, this is what we call the hieroglyphic writing. Nobody could read it at this time. Next came a cursive Egyptian script called Demotic. Nobody could read that. But the bottom section they could read, that's Greek. And they've been able to read that for many centuries. So they guessed that this is the same message, whatever it was, in 3 different scripts. So they went to work on it. And after about 20 years working from the known Greek language at the bottom, they were able to work out, for example, certain characters would keep cropping up. Well, they kept cropping up in the Greek too. So they were able to gradually piece it together. Took them 20 years, especially this man here, Jean-Francois Champollion, a brilliant Frenchman, and they were able to read the Egyptian hieroglyphs. Now, what did that mean? Well, ancient Egypt was one of the greatest civilizations in the ancient world, in this part of the world. We're talking about the Mediterranean, Mesopotamian region tonight, the Middle Eastern region. All right, so we're not talking about China tonight. They had great civilizations too. We're concentrating on this particular area. Now, by the way, China's worth visiting for archaeology. If you want to see some great things, go to Xi'an and see the terracotta warriors. That's an awesome thing to see. Amazing what the Chinese had in past times as well. Even India, I've been to India, and some of the pottery and some of that sort of thing, very similar to what you get in the Middle East, because they traded these people, and so you get similar pottery and so on. Anyway, let's keep going. So what this meant now was they were able to unlock the history, the culture, the medical practices, the religious beliefs and so on of this great civilization in Egypt, the land of the pharaohs. The next important discovery was in Iran. Anybody been to Iran? Great, right. Iran is one of the best places. I love visiting Iran. The people are super friendly for a start. We sometimes have the picture back here in Australia and the Western world that they're all running around with a machine gun and a bomb to blow your head off or something. This is not the case. Very friendly people. In actual fact, when I've been to Iran 3 times now, and I've only seen one man with a gun in the whole 3 years, and he was in a guard tower on an army base where you'd expect someone to have a gun. But if you go to Israel, for example, you're going to see every man, woman, and his dog almost carrying a gun. I've seen guns stacked that high because of the problems that they have in that particular part of the world. But yeah, and other countries, even in Rome, I've seen them out the front of the bank with a submachine gun. But anyway, very friendly people and a delightful country to visit. I'm not suggesting that it's always good for people, but it's okay for tourists, as long as you don't come from Israel and you don't come from America to a large degree, I suppose. It's a bit safe. Anyway, everyone has their ways. But here we are. I want to go to Kermanshah. Kermanshah is a large city there in Iran, going out toward the west of Tehran. Now, we're on the Silk Road here, from Asia across towards Europe, and this was a very travelled route for trade and so on, but they have these cliffs just outside of Kermanshah, known as the Behistun inscription. This is the Behistun inscription I want to share with you, because you see, just like people graffiti today, especially in Sydney, they do a lot of that, don't they? They graffitied in ancient times. The kings left their graffiti to tell of their exploits and so on. And so on these cliffs you will see the famous Behistun inscription. Now the story's not that important to us. It's about King Darius the Great, or Darius the First. This is the man here himself, up here. This guy here, if you can just see it now. He's just telling about the revolt that he's put down. But what's important is that the story is told in 3 different scripts of the cuneiform script. Now this is the language, or the script I should say, that was used in Mesopotamia, which is believed to be the cradle of civilization, where people spread out to India and China and to Europe and so on. Mesopotamia, many historians and scholars believe that's where it began, and people spread out from there. And so this script was used by the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Sumerians, and many people used this script. They even used it in other parts of the world because of trade and so on. So they worked on this inscription for a number of years, and it's thanks to people like Henry Rawlinson, a British soldier who worked in this area, they were able to, or they are now able to read this writing. There are not a lot of people who can and so there are heaps of clay tablets in the basements of British Museum, the Louvre Museum and other museums that nobody has ever yet read. They're just sitting there in cupboards waiting to be read, and I'll say more about that in a while. So now they were able to understand the Mesopotamian script, and they found whole libraries, 20,000 clay tablets from the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, for example. Now, what did this mean? Now they could unlock the history, the culture, the religious practices, and all of the way they traded and lived in Mesopotamia, and that helped them in a big way. The third of the most significant discoveries was found here in Israel, on the Dead Sea. By the way, some have been to the Dead Sea? Good place to swim, isn't it? You can't sink. Well, you've got to keep your eyes closed, of course. You don't put your head under and don't have a cut, because you'll know about it. Very salty. You're oily too, you're right, very oily. But a good place to go and swim if you've never swum before. Now, on the northwest corner of the Dead Sea, in the Israel side of the Dead Sea, some young Bedouin boys were here in Qumran, and they were minding the clan's goats when one of the goats strayed up into an area where there were some caves. The boys threw a stone at the goat to get it back. The stone missed, but they heard the sound of something breaking, like pots breaking or something. They raced up to the caves, but all they found were these old pots and inside some very old scrolls. Well, I'm sure they were disappointed because they were hoping for treasure. But the Bedouins took them, or they took them to the Bedouin clan, and the Bedouin clan took them to Bethlehem, where there was an antiquities dealer by the name of Mr. Kando, and he purchased them for the princely sum of $100. A few years later, those scrolls were selling for $500,000. That's good money, isn't it? And of course, they're priceless today. You wouldn't be able to buy them unless you were someone like Bill Gates or something. And they're famously known, for obvious reasons, as the Dead Sea Scrolls. They're on display in some museums today, especially in Israel, in Jerusalem as well, and Jordan as well. So why are they so valuable? Why so valuable? Well, there are a number of reasons, and especially for us here tonight. Number one is they're very old, and anything very old gets good money. How old were these scrolls? We know how old they were from three sources. Number one, the style of the script, because script styles change through time, don't they? For example, most of us tonight probably would have a real hard time reading 16th century English. It's still English, but it's just that the style has changed. So they knew from what time period this script style was used. That helped them. They did radiocarbon dating on these scrolls as well, and they also found in some of the caves, with some of the scrolls, coins, and coins have someone's picture on them, and that helps to date what time it's from because of the coins. So they dated them back through these three methods to 100 to 200 years before the time of Christ. So they're very old scrolls, back about 2,200 years roughly. All right, now the other thing that's important for us tonight is why they're so valuable is they contain ancient predictions with a proven track record, and you're going to see that very clearly tonight as we proceed through the series. And well, what are these scrolls? Well, it's believed they were written by a group of Jewish monks called Essenes, like monastic fellows, living in the Judean desert. And these scrolls, about 30% of them, were the practices, the rules of their society, how they lived and how they should live together. Another third were their religious beliefs that they held, and the biggest proportion, 40% of them, were what we would call the Old Testament, that you might have seen a Bible in a motel, maybe you've got a Bible at home. That first section called the Old Testament, every part of that was discovered except the book of Esther. That was not in the collection because these scrolls were actually hidden away from the Romans. That's why they were found in caves, but they didn't find every book of the biblical records. Now, the third reason is this. When scholars looked at this, they thought there would be a lot of differences between the biblical writings you might have in a motel room or your Bible at home or whatever it is, and the Dead Sea Scrolls. Surely there'd be a big difference, because they thought if you copy the original and someone copies the copy of the original and someone copies the copy of the original, and you keep copying from copies down through time, surely you're going to introduce a bunch of mistakes. So, for example, if I whisper in this lady's ear something and we pass it around the room, we've all played Chinese whispers, and it comes back here, Ziggy gives it to me, what have we got? A big difference, right? They thought, well, surely that will be the same for writing. But when they compared the Old Testament books with the Dead Sea Scrolls, essentially it was the same in terms of meaning. And we know pretty well probably why that was the case, because the Jewish scribes were very particular when they copied. For example, sometimes Jewish scribes would do word counts. So if you copied something out, you would count how many words in your copy and how many words are in the original that you're copying from. And if there was a difference, oftentimes screw the thing up, start again. Now they found 2 almost complete scrolls of the book of Isaiah. Now they're 9 metres long. That's a very long piece of writing. Imagine if you came to the last line and you made a boo-boo. Oh, mamma mia, got to start over again. But this is why, essentially, there's no change in the meaning. All right, now that's what we can do now tonight, is we can see now, right, there's ancient predictions here that we're going to see as a proven track record. Let's check up on these 2 things. Let's check up on, does it have historical accuracy if it makes predictions? And what about the track record? Is it a good track record, or is it like 16%? Or has it got a batting average of 100%? So let's begin in this first session by looking at the historical accuracy thing. What's the evidence that we have? Well, let's begin by going to a place probably many of us have never heard of, and that is Moab. Moab was once a great a civilization. I wouldn't say a great civilization, but it's in Jordan. 3 special areas: Edom, Moab, and Ammon, all part of Jordan today. But Moab, they discovered something from this area. Now, in the biblical writings, you will find that this man is mentioned, King Mesha of Moab, and his rebellion against the Israelites who were in charge of that area that they had conquered. And he rebels against them. This is the 9th century BC, so a long time ago, about 2,900 years ago, thereabouts. Now, here's what it says in the biblical manuscripts. Now, Mesha, king of Moab, was a sheep master, and he had to pay to the king of Israel, whose name was Omri at the time, the wool of 100,000 lambs and of 100,000 rams. He must have been a New Zealander to have all those sheep around, wouldn't he? Anyway, but it came to pass that when Ahab, who was the son of Omri, was dead, that the king of Moab rebelled against the king of Israel, Jehoram, son of Ahab. That's what the biblical writer said. Now let's find what the archaeologists have discovered. If you ever go to France and you go to Paris, make sure you visit the Louvre Museum. You probably will, because you want to see the Mona Lisa. That's where that lady is hanging on the wall there. But make sure you get to some of the archaeology stuff, because inside here we have the Mesha, or the Moabite stone. This was found at a place called Dibon in what is Jordan today, and it's from the 9th century BC, just like the time period in the biblical records. But what it says is this: I am Mesha, king of Moab. Omri, king of Israel, had oppressed Moab many days, and of course then he had sons, but I have triumphed over his house, meaning his sons that come after him. I've rebelled against him and I've come out of it. Just as the biblical writers had mentioned, so they discovered. That's what the ancient Moabites said. So this is what we're talking about when we talk about historical accuracy. Let's go to ancient Babylon for just a moment. Ancient Babylon was in what we would call, or it was in Iraq today, but we want to go back to 600 BC, so 2,600 years ago. This was a very famous city, and the king of Babylon at the time was Nebuchadnezzar II. He's mentioned scores of times in the biblical writings, but he's also mentioned many times in ancient documents. We have lots of clay tablets about Nebuchadnezzar in the museums today. But what I want to share is this. Nebuchadnezzar, according to the biblical writers, made 3 raids on Jerusalem. 605, 597, and then in 586 BC, he destroyed the city of Jerusalem and its temple that Solomon had built. That's what the Bible claims. Now, what have archaeologists discovered? Well, first of all, you can go to the British Museum and you will see this clay tablet. This clay tablet from the Babylonian Chronicle of Nebuchadnezzar talks about the raid he made in 597 BC. Not only that, in his raid in 586, when he destroyed the city of Jerusalem, the Bible mentions this man's name from Babylon, Nebo-Sarsechem, the Rabsaris, or the chief, one of the chief officials of the Babylonians. Let me read it to you, what it says in the biblical writings. Then all the officials of the king of Babylon came and took seats in the middle gate of Jerusalem, that is, Nergal-Sharezer of Samgar, Nebo-Sarsechem, a chief officer, Nergal-Sharezer, a high official, and all the other officials of the king of Babylon. So you got the idea. They're gathered at Jerusalem because they're about to destroy it. Now, what's interesting, I mentioned all those clay tablets that nobody's been able to read because not too many people can read them. Just about 5 years ago, I think it was so ago, a scholar from Austria was reading some of these clay tablets, and lo and behold, he picked up one, and this is what it mentioned. This man, Nebo-Sarsechem, there it is, a chief official. This is the guy who was mentioned in the Bible. It seems the same guy. So this is what we're getting at again. It gets it right. Let's have a look at another one that's quite fascinating. The ancient Babylonians had numerous methods to try to predict the future. You can go to the Louvre Museum and you can see all sorts of magical texts that they used and different ways to try to tell what's going to come next. We'll talk about some of that in our third presentation as well. But here's something that the Bible mentions. It mentions liver, looking in the liver. Let me put it up for you. The king's got to make a decision. So this is what it says. For the king of Babylon stands at the parting of the road, at the fork of the 2 roads. Now, what does that mean? He's got to make a decision. We use that terminology today. I'm at the fork of the roads. I mean, what am I going to do? Am I going to buy a house or am I not going to buy a house? He's saying, should I go to war or shouldn't I go to war? What should I do? So how does he make his mind up? Well, he uses divination, it says. That's magic in ancient times. We're not talking about water divining. We're talking about divination. This means magical things. And these are some of the text in the Louvre Museum. He shakes the arrows. That's another way. He consults the images, his statues, his idols. And he looks at the liver. Now you look at that and you think, what on earth is that about? Looks at the liver. Well, we know what that's talking about now, because we now know that the Babylonians used sheep's livers to try to predict the future. What the idea was, you kill a sheep, you take out its liver, and you look at the patterns. They've been doing this for centuries, remember, down through time. Whoa, that's a dark colour. That's those patterns, they don't look good. That means, because they would compare it with their little model liver, that means you're going to die if you go to this town. So he's not going to go to that town so he doesn't die, so he'll go somewhere else. That's what they sort of do. It's a bit like reading tea leaves and all those sort of things, patterns in the sand. They even had clay tablets you can see in the British Museum where the flight patterns of birds, that was supposed to be able to tell them the future. All sorts of methods that the Babylonians used that even some we use today, or some people do. So historical accuracy. Whoever wrote the book knew this is what they did. That's the point, because they lived there at the time. Well, let's close on these people now, the Hittites, and then we'll get you to stand so that you don't go to sleep. All right, the Hittites. Probably many of us have not even heard of these people. Well, certainly the scholars hadn't heard of them, and they said that the biblical writers were wrong because the Bible mentions this group of people some 40 times, and historians had never found any evidence of this group of people called the Hittites. Here is one example of where the Bible mentions these people. Look, the king of Israel has hired against us the kings of the Hittites and the kings of the Egyptians to attack us. Notice the Egyptians and the Hittites. It puts them side by side here. So because the scholars had never found evidence, they said the Bible is wrong, this is a mistake, this is a blunder, we can't trust the Bible. Well, then they started, by the way, if you go to the 1860s edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica, for instance, you'll find 8 lines on the Hittites, and it's pretty much all from the Bible, because they didn't know anything about these people. All right, so when they started excavating, when they started archaeology in central Turkey, they uncovered this humongous city. It's known as Hattusa. When I take people to this place, we have to travel around it in a bus. It's so big, you don't want to walk. You'll be worn out before we even get halfway through. So it's a huge city here in central Turkey. And just next door, there is a Hittite temple. Here, by the way, are some gates into the city of the Hittites. And here's one of their gods that you can see in one of their temple areas. And these cute little guys with their nice little hats on, my friend Andrew is having a look at here. Cute little guys, aren't they? Well, this is typical Hittite inscriptions. So they now know that this people did exist. Now, once they could read the Egyptian hieroglyphics, lo and behold, when they went to Abu Simbel, which is the southern part of Egypt, they came to this temple of Ramesses the Great. When they went inside the temple, there was an inscription of Ramesses II fighting of all people the Hittites. So they knew they did exist. The Bible was right. The historians were wrong. They had to agree, yes, these people were quite some group of people. In fact, if you ever go to Turkey, great place to go to the Istanbul Museum, and you will see this Hittite-Egyptian peace treaty between Hattusili III, the king of the Hittites, and Ramesses the Great, or Ramesses II. So clearly, the Bible was right. And we know today now that the Hittites rivaled the Egyptians and the Assyrians. They were a mighty power, yet scholars thought the Bible was wrong. So this is what we're getting at when we talk about historical accuracy. Whoever wrote this book lived at the time in which they said it was written. They were reporting accurately. Now, W.F. Albright would probably be one of the greatest archaeologists of archaeology in the Middle East. He wrote over 800 works on archaeology, books and papers and so on, and he was the director of the American School of Oriental Research. We call it ASOR. This is like the creme de la creme society for archaeologists in the Middle East. In other words, this guy is no fool. He dug in the Middle East, in Israel, for many years. Notice what he had to say about what we've been sharing in this first presentation. He said, "In the centre of history stands the Bible. Thanks to modern research, meaning archaeology, we can now recognise its substantial historicity, meaning it's historically accurate. To sum it up," he said, "we can now treat the Bible from beginning to end as an authentic document of religious history. It's authentic, its history is right, it's correct, it got the facts right." That's what he's saying. So we could sign off on number 1 point, but you'll even see more in the next presentation as we move through. We go through to the second section now, and that is, does it have a proven track record? It's already all good to get the facts right from the past and the present, but what about the future? We need to look at that when we come back. We'll be looking at the prophetic code, and we'll be going back to ancient Babylon, and I'll be talking about Alexander the Great's connection with an incredible prediction that we find in the book of Daniel.